I'm going to take a few moments to chat and share some information about a little bit on anatomy, kinesiology, so movement of the muscles, and then we're going to go ahead and start with some movement. I don't expect today to be super strenuous or difficult. You might notice that some of these actions really hone in on mobility of specific joints, and sometimes that can be quite a deep stretch or a new sensation, but I don't expect anyone to feel overtaxed. You're going to see that there's a little bit of an accumulation style to everything. So we start in a way where the practice is attainable, and then as everything evolves, you can choose to deepen the stretch or the activity or the challenge, essentially. But it's all up to your discretion. If you feel any pain, that's usually a sign to maybe back off a little bit. It's one thing to feel an intense stretch. It's another if you feel any sharpness or catching in a joint or anything that really seems to maybe be a little bit more alarming than a deep stretch. So be able to really discern between those two things. We are going to be using a mat, some blankets, and a little bit of wall space today. So make sure you have those nearby. Sometimes the more blankets, the merrier. If you only have a few, then we'll make it work. There's not going to be too many poses where we actually use them. So primarily a mat and the wall. Again, if you have any questions here in this initial part of the webinar, then you can go ahead and put it in the chat box. As soon as we get started, I'm going to try and use my best discretion to clarify anything, and really, again, emphasizing that accumulative practice. So if there's any major concerns, then you can go ahead and type it in there, but I might not see it right away. So that's just a heads up with everything. So that's how I would encourage you to use your own discernment if you feel any pain, pinching, or aggravation, to maybe not go as deep into whatever we're practicing. My intention with this webinar is to really emphasize a couple of key movements which we practice in essentially any yoga pose that you might confront in any class. There are over 250 yoga poses we could possibly practice today, but a lot of this is going to be more about mobility. And so we're going to hone in a little bit of awareness on specific areas of the body, and then use that knowledge to maybe apply to a pose and build some more reflection from there. So the things that we talk about today, you're most likely going to find a connection with and be able to apply in other classes, or if you were to go and practice other poses we might not cover today, you're most likely going to be able to pick out some of that mobility aspect and similar concepts through any pose that you might practice. To get started, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I found this really cool 3D model website, and so you should be able to see there's a little 3D skeleton here on the screen. And this thing is really cool because we can turn it, we can look at different angles and kind of see the skeletal structure and really observe what is this frame that we're moving around and that we're working with as we practice these yoga poses. This can sometimes get really complex because it's very dynamic. And so today I'm really just going to be highlighting some key areas and key joints that we're going to focus on in class. So really starting by looking at the side of the body here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. You can see the spine. I'll turn to the back so you can see a little better. You can see the spine here. Here we have the tailbone right near the pelvis. You can even see that there's these sit bones at the base of the pelvis. I don't know if you've ever had a skinny kid sit on your lap and their sit bones feel a little bit sharp on your thigh. That's usually what you're feeling, is the bottom of the pelvis and the sit bones. But right between there, a little bit higher, there's the tailbone. And then we have the sacrum. And the sacrum is this triangular bone that's in the back of the pelvis. But this is what connects the pelvis to the rest of the spine. This is the sacrum and the tailbone. From there, we have different areas of the spine. The area that's right between the pelvis and the rib cage is known as the lumbar spine. The area of the spine that's behind the rib cage in the upper body is the thoracic spine. And then up here, you have the cervical spine, and this is really our neck. Now, if you look from the side view, you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a curvature here, right? The tailbone starts to tuck in a little bit. You can see at the top of the pelvis where the lumbar spine actually dips forward slightly towards the abdomen. And then this upper back area does have a natural outward curve to it before coming up to the cervical spine, the neck, where it starts to dip in forward towards the throat. So just seeing that it's not a straight line up and down, I think is going to be helpful and informative as we move through class today. Sometimes if you feel a little bit more stiffness in the upper back, we're going to be kind of thinking about and working with that idea of the curvature of the spine in this area, as opposed to what's happening here in the lumbar spine. So that's a little bit on the spine, 3 different areas. Now, the other place that I wanted to talk about a little bit more today is really the collarbones and the shoulder blades. So this is our shoulder joint. I'm just going to turn a little bit so you can get a couple angles of a view on it. So we have a pretty dynamic shoulder here. You can see the rib cage, which is quite apparent, but then layered on top of the rib cage is this other triangular bone called the shoulder blade. And then we have our upper arm bone, the humerus bone that connects there into a little socket. And then we have our collarbone. And so even while I'm talking, you can even use your hands and touch these areas of your body. The collarbones are quite prominent. Usually we can see those through the skin. You can try and track on your upper arm and feel where does the shoulder bone, the humerus bone, connect into the joint. You can even, as you poke around in that area, there's a bunch of tendons and muscles. Notice if anything is sore. We'll do a little bit more on that in a bit. And we have our shoulder blade. One really cool thing about the shoulder blade is that it actually moves on top of the rib cage. So there's layers of muscle between the rib cage and the shoulder blade. So even as you roll your shoulders forward and back here, you can start to feel those spread and come together, come a little bit closer towards the spine. So that's a little bit on the shoulder joint. Again, I'm not really going to be getting very, very detailed with a lot of this. I could spend a lot of time talking about these individual joints, but I just kind of want to give a nice little intro. And then we have the hips. And so as we look a little bit closer here, you can see our tailbone, and then we have our pelvis. And with the pelvis, we have those sit bones that I had mentioned. And then you can see where the thigh bone, it's really called a femur bone, connects in to the hip socket here. So just getting a fun visual on that. You can see the front of the sacrum here. So it's that triangular bone, a little bit of a different shape from this angle. And you can kind of see through there, there's the tailbone on the other side. Here you have that pubic bone region. Seeing how the sacrum kind of has a little bit of a curve to it, coming into the tailbone. And you can see here where the top of the sacrum actually meets the lumbar spine. You can see how this vertebrae, or this section of the spine, is a little bit different. You can see where they connect. Another cool part about the body in general is that you have kind of muscles connecting in different places. So there's a muscle, I'll show you in a minute, that connects here, actually at the head of the femur bone, and then it weaves up through here and attaches up in the lumbar spine. And so it's actually going through the pelvis here, down to the bottom of the pelvis, connects forward and up here to the lumbar spine. And you'll kind of see a visual of it so you can start to picture it. But often this is a big influence on low back pain. As that area starts to contract, it actually pulls that area of the spine forward, which can create some low back pain and tension. just observing how, okay, this is the frame, this is how the muscles connect, or excuse me, this is what the muscles are connecting, is this frame and this skeletal system. So that's a little bit on that. Let me make sure here. I got my chat window open. So now we're going to switch to looking at the muscular body. And this image is pretty neat because it shows on the right side some of the larger muscle groups. And then on this left side, it shows some of the more detailed ligaments and tendons. So I'll zoom in there in a moment. Just want to kind of give you an overview visual. Let's go ahead and start with the spine on the back of the body. So here in the back of the body, if you can envision that skeletal system we were just looking at, we have our spine in the middle, here are the shoulders, and then we have the hips. So if you can envision the pelvis underneath here, you can also think about the shoulder blades up here at the top of the spine. I'll concentrate a little bit more on the shoulders. Now, as I kind of move this around, we're going to talk about the larger muscles specifically. You can see on the front of the body, there's this big pectoral muscle that connects to the very center of the chest plate. This is the sternum. And then it also connects up here to the collarbone. So this giant muscle, pectoral muscle, has a very big influence on the collarbones and on the shoulder blades. You can see how there's a little bit of muscle here at the top of the shoulder. This is the deltoid. And then as we move to the back of the body, you can see this large triangular shaped bone. Now remember, this is on both sides. This left side just has that layer removed, so you can see what's underneath it. So this large triangular muscle is called the trapezius. And underneath, you can see this muscle right here that's holding the shoulder blade to the spine. This is called the rhomboid. Again, it's on both sides underneath that trapezius muscle. So pretty interesting. On this one, you can see a little bit more of how that shoulder blade has its own muscle on top of it, how that's connecting into the shoulder joint from the collarbone. Now that connection area is becoming a little bit more complex. You have a bunch of tendons and ligaments in that area. You have about 8 different muscles, tendons, and ligaments that are used to attach your upper arm bone into that socket. Really want you to be aware of the trapezius muscle and the rhomboids, and seeing that there's these neck muscles in the back of the neck that kind of span quite broadly from the base of the skull all the way down to, about middle of the rib cage. So if you start to feel your shoulder blades moving around, it's just right below that you're going to find that trapezius connects. Another really important muscle is called the latissimus dorsi. You can see that one here. It connects in under the armpit, spans across the side of the rib cage. This white is more of a cartilage style tissue. It's called fascia, and that's usually used in the body to connect bone to muscle. So there's a lot of fascia, and this large lat muscle, latissimus dorsi. Notice how it weaves underneath the trapezius slightly. But again, you can touch this area on your body and just observe, see if you can start to feel where these are even before we get started in class. Now moving into the hips. So we have one side of the body that has that outer layer, and then you can kind of see in there, see the spine in there. You can see a couple of muscles that are weaving through the pelvis. And deep in there is that psoas muscle I had mentioned that's attaching to the lumbar spine and kind of weaving in to the pelvis. We have our abdominals, a couple of different types of abdominal muscles. We're not going to talk too much about those today, although they will most likely get engaged at some point. We have the gluteus maximus, so that larger muscle of the buttocks. But do note how there's all kinds of little muscles underneath that. They're not even little, they're fairly large, that are connecting that top rim of the pelvis and kind of near the sacrum here. That's where the tailbone is. So you have that sacrum area. There's all these muscles coming out of there, attaching to the femur bone, that head of the thigh. On the fronts of the thighs, we have a couple of different types of quadricep muscles. So we have some on the side, middle, and on the inner thigh. I'm going to work with those today. And then on the back of the legs, we have the hamstrings. And you can see how those connect into the knees. We have our calf muscles down to the feet, the ankles. We'll do some work moving those around, even the bottoms of the feet. Some of you might have heard of plantar fasciitis. And if you haven't, it's where the bottom of the foot, this muscle, gets very fatigued. Sometimes it's spawned by really high arches or really low arches. Either polarity can spawn this plantar fasciitis. And this muscle gets very worn out and sore, and often it leaves this really achy sensation in the bottom of the foot. Whenever we feel that achy type stretch in the body, anywhere in the body, it's because there's a little bit of fascia that's starting to build up. You know, it's one thing to feel a deep stretch of a muscle. It's another thing when you feel that really achy kind of stretch, and it's not very enjoyable. We almost want to avoid it more than anything, but that's usually there's a buildup of fascia that's happening from lack of movement. So that can tend to happen in this area, especially if there's pain from plantar fasciitis. We can also get fascia buildup in the ankles and the hips. So definitely something we're going to kind of confront today in class. So just wanted to give you some nice visuals. We have the bicep muscle here in the front of the arm, tricep muscle in the back of the arm. And again, we have the deltoid, which is the cap of the shoulder, and that pectoral muscle. Between all these ribs, you have muscle, intercostal muscles. So even when you breathe and take a nice deep inhale and exhale, you can feel those expand and contract. So it's pretty amazing. I'm actually very, very fascinated by all of this stuff. So I hope that this gave you a nice visual to work with as we start to move forward in class today. But with all of that said, we're going to go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to start laying down. However, I'm going to go ahead and tilt my camera here. We're going to start laying down. However, we're going to transition into working with the hips and accessing some hip mobility after we've laid down for a few minutes. So I want to show you really briefly where we're headed so that you kind of know and you don't necessarily have to look at your screen, and instead you can listen to my words. So we're going to start laying down, and I'm going to show you where we're headed after that. We're going to have the knees bent with the feet flat on the floor. And if you notice that there's some tension in the neck and the head, then feel free to add some support underneath your head, you know, using a blanket. But then we're going to start to stretch the psoas muscle and really get a nice external rotation here in our thigh bone, our femur bone. And so I've taken my foot off the floor. I'm crossing my left leg over to the right thigh here, and I'm thinking about externally rotating and turning this whole upper leg out to the side wall. So we'll do this, we'll switch sides. And then some of you might even feel an interest in moving to the next challenge with this, which is that we would lift that bottom leg up. I still have this knee bent, but now I've just deepened that stretch in the hip. It's not necessary for you to try this. You can even place your foot up at a wall, but having the muscular activity of lifting the leg definitely adds a little bit of a different experience with this practice. We'll do each side one more time, and we'll roll to the side, and we'll come up to a seated posture. So that's where we're headed. So have some blankets nearby off to the side within an arm's reach, and then go ahead and lay down. And for these first few moments, we're actually just going to lay flat on the floor with a blanket supporting our head and our neck. You can start with your feet flat on the floor, bend the knee or bend the elbows down, and then lie flat. If you're using a blanket underneath your head, make sure that the head and the neck are supported, but feel that your shoulders are free and able to just rest on the floor. And then as you straighten the legs, you can take the arms decently wide and feeling that there's some openness in the armpit and in the sides of the rib cage. Once you're laying on the floor, just gently lengthen your inhale and exhale. As you draw your attention into your body, start to let go of any gripping that might be holding on. Really feeling your body settle into the floor. As you gently lengthen your breath, start to tune your mind to your body. Notice how your body is affected by your breath. As the lungs fill with air, there's all these muscles that are expanding and contracting around the lungs. We can use the floor to give us some feedback here. So as we lay flat on the floor, just feeling our body settle down, start to contemplate that imagery that we just looked at. Start to identify where the spine is. You'll feel your legs, very specifically your hips, resting on the floor. See if you can pinpoint where those sit bones and that tailbone might be. We kind of have to draw inward and use our mind's eye to picture these areas. And then as you find your tailbone, think about the sacrum, that triangular bone that's in the back of the pelvis. You can start to track the spine upward. So from the sacrum, the vertebrae grow into the lumbar spine, which is the area of the spine behind the abdomen. And as you observe the size of your rib cage, notice how long that spine area is of the thoracic spine. As you move up to the cervical spine, the spine and the neck, see if you can envision where that area of the spine connects to the skull. And as we start to observe the joints, think about where the upper back is resting on the floor. And as you really tune in to feeling your shoulders and the upper back, try to envision where those shoulder blades might be. Feeling in your mind or seeing in your mind where that head of the humerus bone attaches. So the humerus bone is that upper arm bone. See if you can mentally find in your body where the head of that bone meets the joint. And then notice on the front of the chest where the collarbones are. You can picture the sternum, the chest plate, how the collarbones span from the chest out to that shoulder joint. Yeah, as you gently lengthen your inhale and exhale, notice if there's any tension that started to rise that can be let go of, really in the face, eyes, lips, or jaw. Start to observe your body as an entire unit. If you could trace an outline around your body, what would that outline in its entirety look like? So we've thought a little bit about the bones and the skeleton. Now let's think about those muscles that we talked about. Since we're resting on the floor with the back of our body weighing down, it's a little bit easier to bring some sensitivity to the back of the body. You can feel your hips weighing heavy on the floor. So this gluteus maximus, this large buttocks muscle, and see if you can tune into some more defined and fine-tuned muscles of the hip joint. It's really creating a picture in your mind of how there's a variety of muscles underneath that larger muscle we feel in contact with the floor. You can think about your legs, back of the thighs, the hamstrings. And think of the top of the thighs. These are the quads, or the quadriceps. As we start to move up the body, we have our abdomen, which is that large muscle that spans right in the front of the belly, underneath the belly button. We also have some muscles in our side waist, really thinking about that area, that space between the pelvis and the rib cage. It's usually a little bit more mobile in this area since there's not as much bone structure to work around. And as you move to the back of the body, to the opposite side of the abdomen, and we have the lats, latissimus dorsi, really spanning from the side, or excuse me, from the spine around to the sides near our armpits. It's really that mid back area. And as you move up the back, thinking about that trapezius muscle, it was a fairly large triangular shaped muscle. It attached at the base of our skull and spanned out to the tops of the shoulders. But it also comes down near the base of the rib cage on the back of the body. See if you can picture this diamond shaped muscle across your body, your upper back. As we move to the neck and think about the muscles there, notice if there's any particular area that might be tense or tender. And as we move to the front of the body, think about that large pectoral muscle across the upper chest, attaching to the center of the rib cage or the sternum, all the way out across the collarbones, really to the front crease of our armpit. As you gently lengthen your inhale and exhale, feeling your body settle on the floor. Observe the body in its entirety. We're really just using this visualization exercise to help integrate some of that information that we covered before we get started today. Sometimes it can almost feel overwhelming with how many pieces and components there are to the body. And so, as we build this base of visualizing these different areas, these different attachments, it'll help build a foundation for the poses and the movements that we're going to practice as we move forward in class. Gently start to open your eyes, but allow your focus to be soft. You don't necessarily need to see right now, but having the eyes open can sometimes bring a different type of attentiveness. And go ahead and bend your knees, bringing your feet flat to the floor. We're going to move into that deep external rotation of our hip. So let's start by taking the left leg, left ankle across to the right thigh. And as you take a few breaths here, add a little flex to your left foot. So when I say flex, it's really called a dorsiflexion, where the toes lift towards the shin. It's almost as if the top of the foot is contracting, bottom of the foot is opening. And then go ahead and point your toes, kind of like a ballerina. And so as you point your toes and you contract the bottom of your foot, this is a plantar flexion. The bottom of the foot is now contracting, toes point. You should feel the whole top of your foot and ankle stretching. And we'll do that 2 more times. So flexing the foot, pressing through the inner heel, lifting the toes towards the shin, and then pointing the toes. And as you point the toes, notice how the top of the foot can stretch, even that front of the ankle gets some length. One more time, flexing the toes, pressing through the heel, and then pointing the toes, squeezing the toes towards the bottom of the foot. Now returning back to that flexion of the foot, so the toes are lifting towards the shin. This is going to help stabilize the ankle and the knee, because really we want a lot of this rotation and mobility practice to happen in our hip joint. Now, I want you to use your left hand, and as you spread your thumb and your index finger, you can actually take your hand to your thigh, and then slide your hand down and feel where your femur bone, where that thigh bone attaches to the hip joint. And you're going to feel a hip crease. And as you use your hand and your thumb, try to externally rotate that. So you're essentially trying to deepen that crease, but we also want it to move from inside out. Then giving a little pressure on your left ankle towards the thigh. Try to take your knee away from your body just by using the muscles. So we're not using our hand to press the knee away. Instead, we're using our hand to really focus on deepening that external rotation of the hip. And we want to keep a certain type of strength and muscularity in that joint so that it spawns stability. With that stability, certain muscles are going to be contracted to hold that joint in place. But that stability provides a way for other muscles to become more flexible. You'll feel a little bit more of a contraction in the outer hip. And really, this is focused on stretching that psoas muscle. So I briefly mentioned that psoas muscle, how it attaches on the inside of the pelvis near the femur bone, head of the femur bone, then tracks up to the lumbar spine right above the pelvis. Now, as you take a nice deep exhale, try and tuck your tailbone up towards the ceiling. So you might start to feel your low back or the back of the pelvis move towards the floor. You don't necessarily want to press it in a way that's uncomfortable, but that is kind of a symptom of tucking the tailbone up towards the ceiling. Now, rather than that lumbar spine lifting away from the floor, we want it to lengthen, as if we're trying to almost eliminate that slight curvature we saw in the spine. And you can bring your leg back to center, left foot to the floor. Now lifting that right leg up, so right ankle comes to the left thigh. One hip might be different than the other. We're going to start by flexing the foot, dorsiflexion, so toes lift towards the shin. And then point the toes, kind of like a ballerina. As you point the toes, feel how the whole top of the foot, front of the ankle gets a nice stretch. And then dorsiflexion, so lifting the toes towards the shin, pressing through the inner heel. Can even press through the big toe ball mount. And then back to pointing the toes, plantar flexion. And one more time, each extension or each flexion. Lifting the toes towards the shin. Now the top of the foot, front of the ankle is contracting, but the back of the ankle can start to stretch. Achilles tendon, base of the calf. And then point the toes, plantar flexion. And we'll come back to that dorsiflexion with the toes lifting towards the shin, pressing out through the inner heel, stabilizing the ankle so that we can stabilize the knee. And you're going to take your right hand, spreading the thumb and the index finger, track your hand up your thigh, and feel where that femur bone connects to the hip socket. Finding that hip crease. And as you just gently press your hand into that area, try to encourage a external rotation. So we're pressing that crease of the hip not only away from our body and away from ourselves, but we're also trying to roll and turn that hip joint from inside out. Depending on how you feel in this joint, sometimes we can use enough pressure just to move the skin. Other times we'll use some pressure and it starts to influence the muscle. But if you use a deeper grip, you can start to actually feed some rotation in the bone, deep underneath there, trying to access that skeletal system. Then as you press your right ankle into the thigh, try to press or move your right knee away from your body. As you take a nice deep exhale, tuck your tailbone up towards the ceiling, really focusing on creating nice length in the low back while we work here in the hip. And then you can release your hand, bringing that foot back down to the floor. We're going to do each side one more time. Now this next round, you're welcome to lift that leg that was resting on the floor, or you can even bring it up to a wall. It's just going to intensify that rotation in the hip a little bit more. So now we're taking the left ankle to the right thigh. You can practice what we just practiced, or you might feel ready to lift that right foot off the floor. This also starts to add a little bit more abdominal action. And so as you take a nice deep exhale, soften the abdomen, Belly button moves towards the floor, towards the spine. So really the abdomen becomes long. You can use your hand to find that hip crease again. And as you press your left ankle into the thigh, try to move that left knee away from you. Smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. And then we'll bring that right foot down to the floor, left leg down to the floor. Last side, last time. So right ankle comes to the thigh. You can practice here, or if you feel like you want to intensify this mobility, you can go ahead and lift the left foot off the floor. Bring your hand to that right hip crease. As you press the right ankle into the thigh, try to move that knee away from your body, keeping the right foot flexed. There's some stability in the ankle, in the knee. As you gently lengthen your inhale and exhale, soften the belly, soften the face of the throat. And then you'll bring that foot down to the floor, both feet down to the floor. And then you can take your right arm up and overhead, roll to your right side, and press yourself up to sit. Go ahead and grab some blankets. Well, depending on how many blankets you have at home, might affect what you're able to do. But I'd recommend sitting on 2 to 4, maybe even 5 blankets. A general rule of thumb is that when we come to sit with the legs crossed, we want the knees to be in line with the hips, and you'll see that the thigh bone, the femur bone, is parallel to the floor. This has a couple of different effects. It can soften the thighs, the muscles of the thighs and the hips. It also starts to lower our center of gravity so that it becomes easier to sit upright. It actually takes less muscular effort to sit tall when our center of gravity is a little bit lower in the pelvis. And we accomplish that by sitting up higher, and the knees actually move a little bit lower than the hips. To have enough support that you're sitting on so that the knees are in line with the hips, you should see that femur bone and the thigh bones are parallel to the floor. Now there's a couple of seated postures, but we're gonna start sitting with the legs crossed, and the heels really come to the head of the shin here. Sometimes we'll bring the feet all the way underneath the thighs. Sometimes we'll cross the legs right at the ankles. But for today, it's kind of somewhere right in the middle of that. The heels are right near the head of the shin. So these are a little bit wider. And then notice if your shins are parallel to each other. Some will bring the ankles in really close to the pelvis when they cross the legs. Let's see if you can actually bring the ankles more in line with the knees. This is also going to broaden your space, broaden how your weight is distributed amongst the legs. So even here with the legs crossed, just start to notice how we're kind of in a position of the leg and the hip that still has that external rotation in the thigh. And we just practiced something very similar to this shape of the leg. Go ahead and bring your hands next to your hips, and as you press your fingertips down, lift the sides of the trunk up. You can even bend your elbows back to the wall behind you. Start to feel that whole pectoral muscle on the front of the body. Stretch. Soften any tension in the face or the eyes. And we're going to start just by taking the arms up and overhead, really getting some length in the side waists. And then bring your palms together. You can bend your elbows so the hands are pointing back towards the wall behind you. And as you press the palms together and squeeze the elbows in, notice if your elbows naturally want to splay to the sides. And with that pressure of the palms, squeeze of the elbows, See if you can lift your elbows up towards the ceiling. As you take a smooth, deep, steady inhale, deep, steady exhale, keep that squeeze of the elbows and see if you can straighten the arms while maintaining that muscular action. And bring the palms together, then the elbows to the hands move back. As you squeeze the elbows together, what you can think about is that this inner arm is turning back to the wall behind you, and the outer arm is turning forward. So we're trying to internally rotate this whole humerus bone, this upper arm bone, deep in the socket. The elbows squeeze, internal rotation, start to straighten the arms. Now we don't have the pressure of the palms, but see if you can still turn the inner arms back, outer arms forward. Then observe if the shoulders are lifting up towards the ears, and instead try to draw the shoulders, the shoulder blades, down the back. Remember, those shoulder blades are gliding on top of the rib cage. Just notice that movement there. Then you can slowly bring the hands down, but keep the side waists lifting. So notice we took the hands up because we really want to get some length in the sides of the spine. And we're going to start with a seated twist. So keeping the side waist lifted, let's go ahead and twist to the right. You take a smooth, deep, steady inhale, deep, steady exhale. Try to soften the abdomen. As you soften the abdomen and feel the thighs weighing heavy towards the floor, we're stretching out the abdomen and the lat muscle. And so whichever side you're turning away from is the side we're getting a nice lat stretch on. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can even lift your chin and look over the right shoulder. Gently lengthen your inhale and exhale. See if you can breathe into the back of the body. Really feel where those lat muscles are. And then coming back towards center. Remember, we still want this upward rising sensation of the trunk, even as we twist. We'll twist off to the left. You can almost envision like the spine is unscrewing, or as if you're corking a wine bottle. Even though we're twisting, there's still this upward rising element and characteristic. As you take a nice deep exhale, soften the belly, lift your chin, look over the left shoulder if you feel comfortable doing so. And as you breathe, start to breathe into the back of the ribs. As you breathe into the back of the body, see if you can identify where this lat muscle is that's stretching. Notice how there's some abdominals on the sides of the trunk that are also stretching. And then coming back to center, sitting nice and tall. We'll do each side one more time. Let's go ahead and switch the cross of the legs. So notice which leg is closest to you. You can lean back, uncross, and then recross. Having the heels more in line with the knees. And then the heels near the top of the shin. And sitting up nice and tall. Now, before we twist this time, think about your sit bones. Think a little bit more about the skeletal system for this twist. You take a nice deep exhale, try to weigh heavy into your sit bones. Then go ahead and rock forward and rock back just for a moment. And do this in a way where you can feel the weight of your sit bones shifting. As you lean back, you're going to feel more weight is on the back of the sit bones. And then as you lean forward, notice how it kind of shifts, right? See if you can feel how there's a little bit more weight on the front of the sit bones. And then find a neutral place. Where's in the middle? Where can you feel that there's an even weight between the front and the back of the sit bones? And then try to assess, is there a difference between the sit bones from left to right? See if you can weigh evenly into each side. Now on your next exhale, we'll twist off to the right. Just observe what's happening in the sit bone region. As you take a nice deep exhale, lifting the spine from the sit bones, the whole spine is growing up towards the ceiling. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can lift your chin, look over the right shoulder. Just envision the whole spine growing from the sit bones while it twists. Then coming back through center and twisting off to the left. Nice deep inhale and exhale. Feeling the weight of the sit bones from front to back, left to right. And noticing how you can grow the spine up with your breath. Smooth, steady inhales, smooth, steady exhales. And then coming back to center. Now we're going to start to work with our shoulders a little bit. So we can actually go ahead and do this together. Let's go ahead and place our hands on the shoulders. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the elbows forward for them to touch, and then take the elbows back. So as you bring the elbows back, notice how the front of the collarbones are stretching, and the shoulder blades on the back of the body are moving in towards the spine. Then as we take the elbows forward, you can even round the upper back a little bit. Notice how the shoulder blades are spreading, and then the chest and the collarbones are coming in. So there's a little bit more of a contraction on those pectoral muscles here. We're going to do a couple more times. You can do this at your own pace, but as you do this, I just want you to feel what's happening in the muscles on the front of the body and the bones on the front and back of the body. As you squeeze the shoulder blades together, there's those rhomboid muscles that are pulling the shoulder blades in towards the spine. So see if you can notice how those are stretching and contracting. I'm going to turn to the side so you can see a little bit of a different view. So as the elbows come forward, I'm rounding, kind of creating some movement. Then as I take the elbows back, I'm lifting the chest up, coming into almost like a mini back bend a little bit. Just a few more times here, forward and back. Just getting some movement in the body. And then you can bring your arms down and rest the hands on the thighs for a moment. And then we're going to do this again. This time we're going to make circles with our arms. So you can bring the elbows forward, and then we're going to take the elbows up, out, and around. And we're going to do 3 of these circles in this direction. Up, out, and around. Notice if there's any clicking or catches. You don't have to do it super wide if there is some discomfort. Then coming back to center, and we're going to do the other rotation. Elbows down, around, up, and in. So 3 times total. There's number 2. Doesn't have to be as deep. And now once the elbows come back to center, we're going to do opposite arms. So one elbow goes up, one elbow goes down. Create these rotations 3 times. Now the shoulders are doing something a little bit different from left to right. And once we're back in the center, we're going to do the opposite. So the opposite elbow goes up, out and around. They meet in the middle before going in their opposite directions. Do this as fast or as slow as you want, 3 times total. And then elbows in and hands down. Just resting the hands on the thighs. You can even swing your elbows side to side and really feel the elbows weighing heavy towards the floor as you sit up nice and tall. Now we're going to extend the arms out to the sides. I'm going to shift myself away from the wall a little bit. So we'll take the hands out to the sides, and you'll have, let's go ahead and take the right hand facing the floor, and then turn the left palm up towards the ceiling. All right, so one hand, this right hand is facing the floor, and then the left hand and left palm is facing the ceiling. Arms are straight out from the shoulders. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn and switch. So we're gonna just turn the palms here, and they're doing opposites. So when one palm is up, the opposite palm is facing the floor. And as you go back and forth, you can even for a moment let your shoulders go with it. So whichever palm is facing the floor, usually the shoulder moves forward, and the palm that's facing the ceiling, the shoulder moves back. But then during these next few breaths, see if you can keep the shoulder blades moving in towards the spine. So now the shoulders aren't moving. It's very specifically that upper arm bone, that humerus bone that's turning in the socket here, while the shoulder blades are moving in towards the spine. Still taking the palms in opposite directions, noticing how the upper arm is moving and affected. And then you can turn the palms up, bend the elbows, and bring the hands down. Now for a moment, go ahead and take your hands behind your back. I'm shifting just so you can see. And we're gonna take our hands really near the sacrum. So if you feel where your pelvis is, the back of the pelvis, there's that triangular bone and it's a little bit more firm. And we're gonna keep the palms open and I'm just stacking the back of my hand against the sacrum, and then I put my opposite hand on top of that. Now I'm using this pressure, I'm actually pressing the back of my hands into the sacrum, and I'm trying to reach the elbows back to the wall behind me. I'm gonna turn to the side so you can see. So backs of the hands are against the sacrum, giving a little bit of pressure, and then the elbows are trying to reach back. You're gonna feel that whole upper arm, front of the shoulders starts to stretch. But also see if you can pull your elbows down to the floor. So sometimes when they lift up, that trapezius muscle contracts, that top of the shoulders and upper back starts to contract. But see if you can actually reach the elbows down and make that muscle long. Now what we're gonna do is a couple of neck rolls. So we're gonna take the chin forward towards the chest, and we're just rolling the head towards the front of the body. So this 180-degree area that's the front of the body, we're not gonna reach the neck back right now. And as you turn your head towards the side, right ear over the right shoulder, and then comes back through center to the other side, left ear over the left shoulder. You can do this as slow or as quickly as you prefer. Go ahead and do this at your own pace. But what I want you to think about is those shoulder blades moving into the spine. And as the elbows are pulling towards the floor, can you pull those shoulder blades down towards the floor, away from the ears? So we're really tractioning the upper back, creating some stability and strength in one area of the spine so that the neck can start to stretch and it feels enough support in the upper back so that it can actually start to lengthen, become a little bit more flexible. Just a few more breaths here. You can even hold your ear over the shoulder for a few moments and seeing if those muscles start to relax a little bit with time. And then you'll bring your chin in line with the chest. Gently lift your chin, gazing forward. Now just gently take the chin forward and back. So I'll turn to the side so you can see. We take the chin forward and back, kind of like jetting the chin out. And then when you bring the chin in, kind of like you're a soldier, really just feeling these different points of flexion with the muscles. And sometimes we might feel if there's a hitch or something uncomfortable that comes up. As you do this, make sure that the shoulder blades are holding stable. Yeah, and you don't have to move very deep into this. You can do to whatever degree of strength that's most appropriate for your body. And then bring the head back to a neutral position here. So you should feel like your head is almost floating. The chin is parallel to the floor, so it's not lifting or dropping. Really is just resting in a more neutral position. And then bring your hands forward onto your thighs, sitting up nice and tall, taking a smooth, steady inhale and smooth, steady exhale here. And we're going to go ahead and come up to stand so you can clear your blankets off the mat. Actually, we're going to sit back down, so we're not coming up to stand yet. We're going to sit back down. We're just going to move the blankets out of the way, and we're going to come to a position here. It's kind of like we're laying on the beach. Now, I know that this can be a little uncomfortable for some wrists, and so what we're going to do is the feet are flat on the floor. We're going to try and come down to our elbows. So you can choose which position is best for your practice. If you're more comfortable having the arms straight with the hands slightly back from the hips, then you can stay in this position. But if you notice that the wrists are really achy or maybe quite uncomfortable in that position, then go ahead and bring your elbows down to the floor. And now, rather than just kind of weighing towards the floor, dropping our weight down, I want you to press your hands or press your elbows down and lift your chest up. Notice how the shoulder blades are rolling onto the back of the body, the front of the chest is opening up. Then as you press your feet into the floor, give a little tuck of your tailbone. And then you can go ahead and drop your back towards the floor. So do at your own discretion. If this is comfortable, then don't do it. But now the shoulder blades are spreading, the front of the chest is contracting. And then as you press the elbows down, open the shoulders, roll the shoulders back behind you. Gaze is slightly forward, maybe even up towards the seam where the wall meets the ceiling. But we want the back of the neck to feel supported, and it will feel quite strong here. We're going to take one foot at a time, and we're going to point the toes and flex the feet. Point the toes and flex the feet. Then we're going to do some ankle rolls. And so you're flexing, and as you roll, then the toe turns into a point. Right? So we're kind of adding some movement, and make sure that you rotate in both directions. So I just switched directions. Now we've been distracted with our feet. Notice, did you start to slouch in the shoulders? Can you keep that attentiveness in the upper body? And then we'll bring that foot back down. Now taking the opposite foot, pointing, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. So lifting the toes towards the shin, then pointing the toes back and forth, and then we do rolls. You can kind of draw circles. Some people say you could write the ABCs with your toes. That's a great way to get ankle mobility. And then rolling the toes in the opposite direction, integrating that flex of the toes towards the shin, and then rolling into pointing the toes. So we get both of those through these rolls. All right, and then bringing the feet back down to the floor. Now if you're looking to up the ante, right, we might even do both at the same time. Now we're integrating the abdomen. You can come to your elbows or have the elbows bent slightly behind you. Rolling the ankles, that's just for fun. Rolling them in different directions. Now we're getting the abdomen a little bit more warmed up. You can even bring the feet off the floor to hover so it's not very high. Just integrating different muscles as we do this and get the ankle joints warmed up. Then bring your feet down to the floor. You can push yourself up to sit. And then now we're going to come up to stand. This is where some wall space is going to be helpful. Let's shift the camera angle just slightly. So we're going to come to the wall. And what we're going to do is we're going to, kind of like we practiced earlier, we had the palms together and we took the elbows up, right? And it was kind of like in this position here. We're going to do this at the wall. So I've kind of made a triangle. Palms are together. Elbows are as wide as the shoulder. We're going to come to the wall. And I'm stepping my feet back just slightly. And we'll take the feet wider than the hips. If you're using a mat underneath you, the feet are about as wide as the mat. And then turn the toes in slightly. Now, really what we're doing here is creating some length in the lats. And we're going to do with this cat-cow action. Some of you might have practiced this with the hands and the knees on the floor, but we're going to do it while standing in this position. So while you're here with the forearms against the wall, I want you to lift your tailbone towards the wall behind you. You can let the head hang and keep the elbows squeezing in. And as you squeeze the elbows in, if your neck feels comfortable doing so, go ahead and look up towards your hands. So now the whole back of the body is contracting. Now we're kind of going to make a little wave. I want you to tuck your tailbone towards the floor, start to round your low back, round your mid back, and then let the head hang and try and round your upper back. So we're keeping the forearms against the wall. I've just kind of rounded and contracted the front of my body. We're leading with the tailbone. So now lift your tailbone back to the wall behind you. Feel how the lumbar spine and abdomen move towards the floor, bending in the upper back, and then lifting the gaze to look at the hands. Keep the outer wrist pressing into the wall and elbows squeezing in towards each other. One more time, tucking the tailbone down, rounding the low back, rounding the mid back, and then rounding the upper back, letting the head hang. Taking a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. Then we'll end with the tailbone kind of lifting back behind. And as you press your heels down, notice how your weight is resting between your inner foot and outer foot. You could imagine that you're wearing roller skates, and you can think about those 4 different contact points. You have the inner heel and outer heel. And we also have that big toe ball mount and pinky toe ball mount. Just observe how your weight is resting in those areas. And you can use your hands, bring your hands to the wall, start to press yourself up to stand and stand up nice and tall. So now we're in Tadasana. Tadasana is mountain pose. Let's go ahead and start by taking the feet hip width apart. And if you have a hard time assessing what hip width apart is, I learned this cool trick. It's kind of like a plie. So you start with your feet together, then you can take your toes wide and then lift your heel up and turn the heel out on both feet. You can do them one at a time or the same time. This is about hip width. It might be a little bit bigger, it might be a little bit smaller, depending on your feet, but that'll give you kind of a general estimate as to where the feet are. And then I want you to look down and turn the toes in a little bit. So it almost looks like you're walking in a pigeon-toed manner. As you take a nice deep exhale, draw the abdomen in and turn towards the side. Draw the abdomen in, tuck the tailbone down towards the floor, and lift the chest up. So we want there to be some length in the lats and in the back of the body, in the mid-back. However, we also want the pectoral muscles to be nice and open and the shoulders back behind us. Now we're going to do what we did before. We're going to take our hands to the sacrum. So backs of the hands are just resting against the low back here, really the back of the pelvis. And as you reach the elbows back towards the wall behind you, also try to pull those elbows down towards the floor. We're going to do a couple of neck rolls here in the standing position. So starting with the chin forward and then rolling your head from side to side. You can decide how long you hold. I recommend during these first few times that you do hold with one ear over the shoulder and notice if that opposite shoulder is trying to lift. Notice if the rhomboids let go of their contraction. So the rhomboids are those muscles that are attaching the inner edge of the shoulder blade to the spine. We want that to be contracting, so the shoulder blades are moving into the spine. As we roll the head back and forth, we're creating a different stretch in that trapezius muscle. That trapezius muscle is that large diamond-shaped muscle in our upper back. We're really stretching the top of that muscle. And then once you've done each side, one more time, you can bring your chin back to center. Slowly lift your chin and bring the hands down along the sides of your hips. Just taking a few breaths here. Smooth, steady inhale and exhale. Just observe your posture while standing for a moment. Oh, we can observe, now we have some new insight. And so we might catch on to things and want to change it, right? But see just for a moment if you can catch on to your habits without changing. So just observe, what are your natural habits? What does your body naturally do when you're not trying? And notice how the weight in your feet might shift. Notice what your shoulders are doing. And then starting from the ground up, starting from the foundation, we'll start to make a couple of little adjustments. And so you can start by lifting the toes off the floor if you feel stable doing that. And notice how your weight is sitting from left to right. And think about those roller skates, those 4 points of your foot that are resting on the floor. The inner heel, the outer heel, the big toe ball mount, and the pinky toe ball mount. See if you can start to even out all of that weight. Then as you take a nice deep exhale, lift the chest up tall. So overall, there's this, we're not slouching anymore, right? We have this upward rising sensation in the body. Just allowing the arms and the hands to hang. So more of this lift is coming from the abdomen, it's coming from the sides of the trunk, and even from the back of the body. Now with your exhale, take a nice deep exhale and see if you can tuck your tailbone down to the floor a little bit more actively. As you tuck your tailbone down, roll the shoulders back. And here we are in Tadasana, mountain pose. So there's a little bit of form, a little bit of structure, but the intention is that we're creating some strength and mobility in the joints so that the vertebrae of the spine can find some length, so that those vertebrae in the spine can actually have some room for the nerves. We have a bunch of nerves that are laced between the vertebrae of the spine. And often when there's compression in the spine, the nerves that are sensory lenient, so they transmit information to the brain about feeling, sometimes when those nerves are pinched, we actually feel pain. About 5% of all the nerves in your spine have the ability to receive a pain sensor and signal and transmit that signal to the brain. But 95% of your nerves are connected to muscles and organs. So if you happen to have pain, one of those nerves in the 5% is being pinched. But what are the odds that you have other nerves being pinched in the spine that don't receive pain? And what's happening in that signal? There could be a stifling in the communication line between the muscle or organ and the brain. So even Tadasana and coming into this with this form and this mindfulness can really create some nice space in the spine on a very fundamental level. And you can go ahead and relax. Stand up nice and tall, but you can let the arms kind of hang. Don't have to practice with as much form. Now this next pose that we're going to practice is called Garudasana, eagle pose. And what we're going to do, I'm going to just demonstrate really quickly so you can kind of see where we're headed, and then we're going to do it together. So we're going to start by taking the arms forward and then bending the elbows. So I have my hands in line with the shoulders, or elbows in line with the shoulders, and my hands are up towards the ceiling. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross one of my arms to the midline, and I'm going to try and hook the opposite elbow around it. Now some of you guys, this is where you're going to be, and this is a great stretch for the upper back and those trapezius muscle, or the trapezius muscle and the rhomboids. But some of you will also be able to reach the wrists towards each other. You might even be able to wrap one of your hands around and hold on to the palm of the other hand. Now, while we're here, we still want to lift the elbows up and lift the wrists away from the forehead. So elbows are lifted, wrists are away. And we can bring them down, unwrap the arms, and we're gonna switch sides. So opposite arm comes in, we wrap, lift the elbows, and stretch the wrists away. Garudasana. Just getting some movement in the upper back and in the shoulder joint, okay? So let's go ahead and do this together. You'll take your arms forward in line with the shoulders, bend your elbows so the fingertips are pointing towards the ceiling. Now take your right arm in, and we're gonna take our left arm and wrap it around the elbow. And so even if you're here, this is great. This is getting some leverage to stretch that upper back. Some of you are ready to reach the wrists towards each other. You might even be able to wrap one of your hands to the palm of the opposite arm. And then lift the elbows up, reach the wrists away from you. Take a nice deep inhale and exhale. Go ahead and let your head rest forward. Now remember our Tadasana stance. Just a few more breaths. And then slowly lift the head, can unravel the arms and spread the elbows. And we'll do the other side. So bringing the left arm in, wrapping the right arm around. Try to reach the wrists towards each other. And then see, some of you will be ready to wrap one of your palms or one of your hands to the other palm. Then lift the elbows up, reach the wrists away from the forehead. You can bring the chin down, but think about your position in the rest of the body. We want that Tadasana stance. The weight even into the feet, tucking the tailbone down. This is really focusing on stretching across the upper back. As you breathe deeply, notice how your breath can kind of open that space in the upper back now. And slowly lift your head, can unravel the arms, and bring the hands down along the sides of your hips. That's a great one specifically for neck tension, neck pain, even discomfort in the upper back. A lot of what we're practicing today can be done individually. So we're really just getting introduced to a bunch of different ways to mobilize our body. You can, again, use them individually or use them in harmony with each other. Now we're going to move back to the wall, and we're going to do a little bit of work with the hips. We've done quite a bit with the shoulders now, right? We've gotten to know a little bit more about that pectoral muscle, the trapezius muscle in the upper back. We've even kind of felt what happens in that upper arm bone, right? We've done some internal and external rotation, taking our hands behind us when we took our hands out to the sides, and we're turning the palms. And we've kind of even stretched out the neck, right? The sides of the neck and the upper neck here where the trapezius muscle is. Now we're going to move down the body, and we're really working a little bit more with the lats. We're going to kind of encounter some stuff with the abdomen, and then the quadriceps and the hamstrings. That's where we're headed now. So what we're going to do is, you can watch for a moment, and then we're going to practice this together. So I'm going to stand near the wall, and I have my forearms at the wall. Can even lace the fingers together. And I'm going to step my left foot back. Depending on how you feel with balance is going to change a little bit on how this pose looks. You can just step that foot back so that more of your weight is on the front leg. Or some of you might feel ready to move into a little bit more of a forward bend here. All right, the intention is, though, whatever position you're in, we're going to start with the heel lifted, and then we're going to try and reach the heel back on that back leg. So again, you might be a little closer to the wall for balance, maybe even just reaching that foot back slightly. Or some of you are going to be ready to bend at the hip and create a little bit more of a forward fold here. So let's go ahead and do this together, whichever position you're in. Let's start by taking the left foot back. The heel is lifted. And as you take a nice, smooth, steady inhale and exhale, draw the shoulder blades in towards the spine. You can give a little squeeze of the elbows to create some stability in that shoulder joint. Then I want you to take a nice deep exhale. And as you tuck your tailbone towards your back leg, you can even round your low back slightly, round your mid back. Now I want you to feel the muscles stretching and starting to get a little bit broader in that area. This is the lats that we're really working with. It seems to be a kind of a gray area. It took me a while to really build some sensation back there. But now we're going to keep that tuck of the tailbone, and then I want you to see if you can press out through that left heel, maybe even bringing that heel down to the floor. And as you do this, notice if your lats shortened and if your tailbone lifted. And instead, see if you can tuck your tailbone down towards that back heel again, rounding, opening the mid to low back. You're going to feel a nice stretch at the back of the calf, maybe even in the back of the ankle. And then you can come back to tiptoes. Remember, tailbone is tucking. So when you come to tiptoes, it's a little bit easier to get that tuck of the tailbone. But then try to keep that tuck of the tailbone just as strong as when the heel is lifted as you bring the heel down to the floor. And then you can come up to your toes, step the left foot forward, and we're going to move to the right side. So now right foot moves back. You can decide how much stability is needed here. So you might have a little bit of a wider stance with the feet if that's something you're comfortable with, or if you need more stability. You might not reach that foot back as far, but start with the heel lifted. Tuck the tailbone down, rounding the low back, rounding the mid back, and see if you can keep that tuck of the tailbone as you press into that heel, bringing it down to the floor, feeling the stretch of that calf as you really make that leg stick straight. Smooth, steady inhales and exhales. And then lift that heel up. We're still rounding and tucking the tailbone, rounding the low back slightly, and then stretching out through the heel. Now see if you can keep the low back rounded with the shoulder blades moving into the upper back. Now we're doing two different things in the spine. Like the lower portion of the spine is rounding towards the wall behind us, but the upper back is trying to come into like a back bend position. And then you can lift that heel off the floor, step the feet forward, and reach the hands down to the floor. So all we're doing now is really just starting to dive into the relationship with the lats and the trapezius, this upper back. And how is that influencing the mid back and even the low back? Now, for this next practice, you can decide if that was good for you or if you're ready to kind of move a little bit deeper. I'm going to demonstrate and then you can decide what works best for you. Now, as we move a little bit deeper, we're actually going to bring the fingertips to the wall about hip height. I'm going to bend my left knee, and I'm actually going to take a pretty big step back behind me here. So the feet are quite wide. And then from here, I'm going to bend my back knee. Right? So I'm bending my back leg. I'm trying to tuck my tailbone here. You can even have a little bend in the front leg also for stability. I'm tucking my tailbone, trying to get that same position of the spine. And then I'm going to try and straighten my back leg. And now sometimes when we go to straighten the back leg, what happens to the spine? Right? Usually it does this. The belly drops forward and the tailbone lifts up. But what we're really wanting is the back to be long. We want the lats to be long, tailbone be tucking down. And as the tailbone tucks down, you're going to feel a nice stretch here in the front of the thigh and in the quadricep. Now this can be done in a little bit of a shorter stance as well. So if you're feeling unstable or need some balance, you don't have to step all the way back. But it does start to intensify and clarify the stretch when we do step back a little farther. So let's go ahead and do this together. You can take your fingertips to the wall about hip height. We'll bend the knees and step the left foot back. It's a pretty big stance, pretty wide stance. I'd say there's about 3.5, 4 feet of space from heel to heel. Then start by bending that back knee. You can have a little bend in the front knee as well. It'll help you hold a little bit more stable. Taking a nice deep exhale, try to round the low back, tuck the tailbone down, but then draw the shoulder blades in towards the spine. So we're creating a certain form in the upper body. And as we draw the abdomen and the belly button in towards the spine, a little bit more length in the lower spine. Now I want you to move slowly as you straighten that back leg, because we want to maintain that tuck of the tailbone. We want to maintain that length in the low back as we stretch the left heel behind us, maybe even taking the left foot to the floor. You take a smooth, steady inhale and exhale. If this feels like there's a little bit more calf stretch, you can even start to bend your front knee, but really keeping that deep tuck of the tailbone. That length in the low back, in the mid back, is really where we're going to get that stretch in the front of the thigh from. So now it's kind of this low lunge position here. Some of you might recognize this as warrior one pose, Virabhadrasana 1. But we're really hyper focusing kind of on that back leg and keeping the length of the spine. Now as you press out into that left heel, lift the chest up, roll the shoulders back, gaze at the wall in front of you. And then you can bend your back knee, can step your front foot back slightly so that it's more underneath you, and then step the back foot forward. Now we'll do the other side. So I'm starting a little closer to the wall, bending the knees, reaching that right foot back almost as far as you can. Or if you're feeling unstable, you can practice with a little bit of a shorter stance. But we're going to bend both knees. Take a nice deep exhale, round the low back, tuck the tailbone down. So we're opening up that whole mid back area, even low back, right? It's all rounding, it's all opening up here. Keep that tuck of the tailbone and see if you can slowly start to straighten that right leg. And so as you slowly do it, you're not allowing anything to pop, right? We're keeping that resistance of the tailbone tucking and the low back staying long. So you press out through that back heel, tailbone tucks down, lift the chest up, roll the shoulders back. Some of you are ready to look at the wall. Taking a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. If you want to intensify this stretch, you can just bend that front knee a little bit here. Taking a few breaths. Eyes soft, face soft. And then straightening the front leg. You can bring that front foot back slightly, step the back foot in, stand up nice and tall. We're going to do each side just one more time. Again, you can decide how deep you go today. So starting with the hands at the wall, about hip height, feet together. Then we'll bend the knees and step the left foot back. Step quite far, especially if this is something you're comfortable with. Then bend both knees. That knee on the front leg should always be above the ankle, but never above the toes. You want to always keep the knee above the heel and ankle, or even back slightly. So knees bent, tuck the tailbone, draw the shoulders back, try to straighten that back leg, but keep the tailbone tucking. Keep the low and mid back long. It's okay if that heel doesn't touch the floor, because this is a pretty big stretch on the front of that left quadricep, front of the left hip flexor. As you press out through that left heel, lift the chest up, roll the shoulder blades back. So we're looking for that Tadasana form, that mountain pose form. You can even start to bend the right knee if you feel like you're ready to intensify this practice. But keep the belly drawing in towards the spine. Keep that tailbone tucking down. Then you'll straighten the legs. Bring the front foot back foot steps forward. Last side, last time. So hands are hip height. Reach the right foot back. Nice wide stance if you can do it. And bend both the knees. Tuck the tailbone down. Try to straighten that back leg. And as you do this, see if you can turn your inner right thigh up towards the ceiling. So there's an internal rotation on that right femur bone. Keeping the tailbone tucked. You might even want to intensify this by bending the left knee forward, but we have to be hypersensitive as to what the low back is doing. As soon as the low back shortens, right, and the lower spine moves into a back bend, then we need to intensify that tuck of the tailbone a little bit more. Essentially, this should be somewhat challenging for you to straighten that back leg because we want that front of the thigh to be stretching here. Smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. And then straighten the legs. Step the front foot back foot forward, stand nice and tall. Great job. So now we're gonna practice a little bit of a standing twist. This is nice for relief in the low back and in the mid spine, really across this top of the pelvis as well. So I'll demonstrate and then we'll do together. It's fairly similar to what we've been practicing. So I'm gonna start near the wall again, and I'm gonna step my left foot back, and I'm gonna have my toes pointing forward. So it's almost like I'm standing with the feet together, both toes are forward. All I'm doing is sliding that foot back about 3.5 feet. Again, if stability is a concern, you can always shorten that distance. So it's your choice. This is all customizable, right, for your body and for your joints. But then we're gonna be here. I have both my legs straight. The legs are split apart, hands are here at the wall, and then we're gonna move into a twist. So I'm bringing my outer hand in line with the midline of my body, and I'm twisting towards my front leg. So in this case, I'm twisting off to the right, taking a few breaths, and this whole side of the lat starts to stretch and get nice and long. And then we'll come back to center, bend the knees, step that back foot forward. We'll switch sides, and we'll do the same thing here. Bringing my hand in, opposite hand comes to the hip, and I'm twisting towards my front leg. Trying to keep the legs straight here, but also keeping in mind everything we've been practicing so far today. And then coming back to center. And once we're done with that, we're gonna actually bring the forearms to the wall and take the feet wide. So I am bending forward at my hips here. I have my forearms at the wall, can let the head hang with the back parallel to the floor. And then you can always heel toe step the feet together and then come up to stand. Okay, let's go ahead and do this together. Starting near the wall, hands are about in line with the base of the rib cage here. Bend your knees and take your left foot back. It's not necessarily as wide as the last practice. This time the legs are both straight. Everything still applies. We want that tuck of the tailbone down, roll of the shoulders onto the back of the spine. So the pectoral muscles are nice and open here. Then go ahead and bring your left hand into the midline, so right in front of your chest at the wall, and then right hand to your hip. Now start to turn off to your right. As you take a few breaths here, notice if you lost that tuck of your tailbone. We still want to feel a slight stretch in the front of that left thigh, that left quadricep. As you reach your right elbow back, notice how the right shoulder blade is drawing into the spine. Some of you might even feel ready to lift the chin and look over the right shoulder. Making the legs stick straight, pressing the left thigh back. So the thigh that you're moving away from is still pressing back to the wall behind you. And then coming back to center, hands at the wall. You bend the knees and step that back foot forward. Now moving to the other side. So right foot back, left foot forward. Both toes are pointing forward here. And you'll bring your right hand on the wall, but it's right in front of the chest. Left hand to your hip. Now trying to keep the legs straight. A deep exhale. So we're tucking the tailbone down. And as you reach the left elbow back, feel how that's pulling the shoulder blade in towards the spine. And some of you might feel comfortable lifting the chin and looking over your left shoulder. But even though you're looking over the left shoulder, try and press that right thigh away from you. So it's that back thigh, the back leg. As you take a nice deep exhale, notice if you lost that tuck of the tailbone down. And then we're coming back to center, hands at the wall, bend the knees and step the feet together. So now this next pose is where we have the hands at the wall and we'll step the feet back. So you can do this a couple of ways. I demonstrated earlier with my forearms at the wall, which is great for those with neck tension or discomfort in the wrists. So you can choose if you want the forearms at the wall or if you'd prefer to have the hands at the wall. Whichever position you choose, we want to make sure that we're not just dropping the shoulders towards the floor, but instead we're trying to keep that active turn of the inner arms up, kind of like you're squeezing the elbows in towards each other. So that's where it can be beneficial to have the forearms. So we want the squeeze of the elbows in towards each other. Shoulder blades move onto the back of the body. But then as you lift your toes off the floor, try to turn your inner thighs back and squeeze the thighs together. So it's almost like you could scrub your feet in towards the midline of your body. Notice how things are a little bit different muscularly when you don't do anything with the legs versus when you lift the toes and try and squeeze the thighs together. Now give a gentle lift of your tailbone back to the wall behind you. You can even start to walk your forearms or hands down the wall slightly. So now this is more of a forward bend. You can either stay here, or if you feel comfortable doing so, maybe bring the hands to the floor. Now this is where we start to get a little bit more of a stretch in the hamstrings. That's the back of the thighs. It's always best to prioritize stability as you do this. We also want the spine to be long. So if you notice that you're really, when you touch the floor, the back is significantly rounding, go ahead and bring your hands back to the wall or elbows back to the wall. We really only bring our hands down to the floor if we feel we can keep that length in the spine. Taking a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale, no matter what position your hands are in, let your head hang. Notice as you press into the heels and lift your sit bones up, start to feel that stretch in the back of the thigh. Here's our hamstrings. Try to make the legs stick straight. And then you can heel toe, step your feet together, about hip width apart. They could have been a little bit wider with that past practice. And then you'll walk your hands up the wall, come to stand, or hands to the hips, and stand up nice and tall. All right. So we had some nice stretch in the quadriceps, the front of the thighs. We targeted those lat muscles, kind of worked a little bit with this back of the pelvis and the sacrum area here. And now we're gonna do a little bit more on this external rotation of the thigh. So you can use the wall for balance. You can either face the wall or you can just have one of your arms near the wall. I'm gonna demonstrate facing you so that you can kind of see a little bit better and more clearly what my legs are doing. So I'm gonna demonstrate and then we'll do together. I'm gonna start by, this is a balancing pose, Vrikshasana. I'm gonna start by leaning on my right foot, kind of towards the wall. I'm bending my left knee and then I'm gonna turn it out to the side. Now just to start, I still have my toes on the floor and I'm resting my heel on my ankle here. So this is stage one of the pose. Stage two has the foot on the calf. And stage three, if you're familiar with this pose, you bring that foot all the way up the thigh. One thing that we are not doing today is we're not gonna put the foot on the knee. So you're gonna have the foot below on the calf or above on the thigh, okay? And then depending on your stability, we can even take the arms and reach them up and overhead, but really want you to focus on this external rotation of the leg and lift of the spine up, and then prioritizing your balance, of course. So then we'll come back to Tadasana, and then we'll switch sides. So if you're facing the wall, you don't have to move as much, right? You can take the legs off to the side and do this. Or if you just have one hand at the wall and you're ready to balance on your own, then you might have to turn your body and face the opposite direction, okay? So let's go ahead and start with the feet together, and the right side of the body is gonna be near the wall. So right hand against the wall. The feet are completely together. We're gonna bend the left knee, turn the knee off to the side, turn the toes off to the side. Now the toes are still on the floor and the heel is gonna rest on the ankle here. As we practice, notice already if that standing hip is leaning towards the wall. See if you can lift the chest up, tuck your tailbone down, and think about the whole body being in Tadasana or mountain pose. And it's just that left leg that's externally rotating, that's turning off to the side. Now, if you're ready for moving into more of a balancing challenge, you can bring that left foot onto the calf. There's a little bit of pressure of that left foot pressing into the calf. And as you do that, see if you can lengthen your inner left thigh. You're gonna feel that outer left buttocks, outer left hip is starting to grip in and become a little bit more active. And we want that pressure of the foot to help us take our knee back to the wall behind us. Now, sometimes people take the knee back, but they don't take into account what's happening to their low back, and they lose that tuck of the tailbone. So remember, we really want that tuck of the tailbone down as we take the knee back behind us. Now, if you feel comfortable doing so, you can bring your foot up the thigh a little bit more, or maybe even reach the arms up and overhead. And as you take whatever position you're in, you can even use the wall and take your hand up slightly and have one hand on the hip if you would like. As you take a few breaths here in Vrikshasana, tree pose, there's plenty of stuff that you can think about, but really try to observe the body as an entire unit. And as you observe the body as an entire unit, there might be little places that stand out to you more than others. See if you can really kind of run through all of those different areas that we've been working with and practicing with today. Gently lengthening your inhale and exhale. And then bring the hands down. You can hold on to that ankle as you bring the foot down. And now we're going to switch sides. So I'm going to turn so you can see from the back. Now we're taking the right leg out to the side. So you'll either face the wall or have your left hand against the wall. Bend the right knee, take your toes and your knee out to the side. Remember, we're just starting with that heel on the ankle still. And notice here, if your tailbone is lifting, if the low back is short and contracted, see if you can take a nice deep exhale and tuck your tailbone down to the floor as you lift the chest up. Even though the tailbone is tucking and the middle and low back are rounded slightly, we want the upper back to be in a back bend. So in the upper body, the upper back, the shoulders are rolling back, shoulders are moving down the spine. Now, if you're ready to move to that next step in balance, you can lift your foot and place it on your calf. Right foot on the calf, but press that foot into the calf. Really let that be an active muscular action here. And as you exhale, tuck the tailbone and try and press your right knee back to the wall behind you, not by using your hand, but very specifically with the muscles in your hip and your leg. And then if you're ready to keep going, you can bring that foot up the thigh. Maybe even start to slide your hand up the wall, reaching the arms up and overhead. Vrikshasana, tree pose. As you take a few breaths here, observe your spine. Observe the hips and the shoulders, so those major joints that are connected to the spine. See if you can soften the neck and the face. As you gently lengthen your inhale and exhale, let go of any unnecessary tension that might be in the eyes, lips, or jaw. And you can start to bring the hands down, bring the foot down, and stand in Tadasana, mountain pose, standing nice and tall. Taking a breath here. Now we're gonna start to head down to the floor. What we're gonna do is we're gonna sit on some blankets. We're gonna finish up this work with the hips and the legs. We'll sit on some blankets and we're gonna take our feet wide. Now you can decide how wide those heels actually go from your body. They don't have to be as wide as mine. What you're gonna feel is that there's the stretch of the inner thighs and the outer thigh is actually contracting into the hip socket. So no matter what position you're in, you can think about that. Flex the feet. So this is dorsiflexion, meaning that that top of the foot is actually contracting. Right? It's kind of like you're trying to pull your toes towards your shin, and then sit up nice and tall. Taking a smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale. Now we're gonna bring our hands just forward slightly. And what I want you to do is really think about what's happening in the back. Now, we've talked a lot about the sit bones and tucking the tailbone. And so for right now, for this pose, see if you can actually lift your tailbone back to the wall behind you. So rather than tucking it down and rounding the back, see if you can actually lift the tailbone up behind you. Roll the shoulders back, and some of you might be ready to walk the hands forward a decent ways. But as you do this, make sure that you're pressing the heels into the floor and the toes are still pointing up towards the ceiling. So smooth, steady inhale, smooth, steady exhale, pressing the heels and the thighs down. So you lift the tailbone up behind you, reach your chest forward. We're not necessarily trying to reach down to the floor, but as we bend forward, we almost have this trajectory of our chest and our sternum, the very center of our chest, moving up towards the ceiling. And then you can bring your hands back to your hips, and we're gonna come to a pose called Baddha Konasana. Now, for the health of the knees, we really want there to be some stability as we bend the knee, and the knee really works on a track, that kneecap. So you can bend your knee straight up to the ceiling, then grab onto your ankle and take your knee off to the side with that knee already bent. Now, if you don't tend to have knee issues, you can hook underneath the thigh near your knee and just swing that foot in, right? So this is a little bit of a quicker movement, but sometimes it can create some instability in the knees when we do it this way. So if you notice the knees are a little bit tender, take your time, lift that back of the knee up, try to soften any gripping or tension that's being held in the back of those tendons and ligaments. So it's a lot more arm work as we bend the knee. And then hook the ankle, bring the heel in, feet together, knees wide, Baddha Konasana. Baddha means bound, and kon means angle, kind of like a triangle. So we have bound angle pose, and the bound angle is our knee. Now, depending on how tender the knees are, or how mobile the knees and the hips are, is going to change. Number one, if the knees are high, it might change how close the heels come to the pelvis. So I want you to use your own discretion on which position and support is best for you. But do try to focus on pressing the big toe ball mounts into each other. So the feet are still flexed in this position. And you can look down at your feet and you can even see where the big toe ball mounts touch, where the inner heel touches, and try and keep that now and take the hands forward. So this is a very strong external rotation on the hips here. This is stretching out that inner thigh still and stretching out that iliopsoas muscle. So some different muscles in the hips and in the pelvis. Now you get to decide how far forward you walk the hands. But what I want you to prioritize is pinning the big toe ball mounts together and rolling the shoulder blades in towards the spine. Not only do the shoulder blades squeeze, but we also want those tops of the shoulders to move away from the ears so that the sides of the neck are nice and long. And then take a few breaths and start to move into your maximum, whatever that looks like today. And then you're going to press your hands into the floor to push yourself up to sit. Bring the legs together and straighten them forward in front of you. Then you can push yourself off of your blanket stack, and while sitting on the floor, we're going to use anywhere from 1 to 3 blankets for this next pose. We're going to practice a supported bridge pose with some blankets underneath our hips. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to refold my blanket here. So I have it in this shelf fold, or sometimes we call it storage fold. I'm going to unfold it once. And from there, I want to tri-fold it. So kind of like you're folding a letter. So I'm going to open it up in front of me. I'm going to push it forward so that there's 2/3 of the blanket touching. And then as I pull back that top layer, now it's that final third of the blanket, and it's nice, a nice little stack. So we'll do this with 1 to 3 blankets. If you generally have tension in your back or your hips, you're going to use less blankets. If you felt fairly comfortable moving to the maximums that I demonstrated in today's class, then you might use 2 or 3 blankets. We're practicing bridge pose, and so sometimes we'll use a block underneath our hips. If you're familiar with that, then you'll also most likely use 2 to 3 blankets. So if you've done this before, you can practice with 3 blankets. If this is fairly new to you, practice with 1 blanket. You can always have an extra one off to the side, just in case you decide that you want some more support. So I'm going to demonstrate where we're headed with all of this, and then we're going to do together. Now I want to start with my blankets off to the side slightly so that I can come up into this pose. I want to be far enough away from the wall so that the wall's not going to inhibit me when I go to straighten the legs. So I can do a little test. All right, straighten the legs, make sure that they're not touching the wall. Then feet come flat to the floor, and I'm going to lay back. And as I lay back, I'm going to take a few breaths here. And I'm going to bring my feet in. I want my blankets to be within an arm's reach. So I'm going to bring my feet in and lift my hips up. As we do this, I'm tucking my tailbone towards my knees, and I'm going to place those blankets under my hips. Now, even though my hips are supported here, I still want to think about what we talked about today. How can I give a little gentle tuck of my tailbone, draw of the belly in towards the spine so that those lats are long, but I also want my traps, upper back, to be long. Shoulder blades come into the body, so we'll take a few breaths here. And if you have low back pain, generally, this is going to be the most comfortable position for us to practice today. If you feel like you'd like to try straightening the legs one at a time, you can absolutely do this as well. This is where we start to get a little bit more stretch across the front of the abdomen and fronts of the thighs. A little supported bridge pose. And then to come out, I'm bringing my feet in. I'm going to lift my hips up, remove the blankets from underneath me, and then bring my hips back down to the floor. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a try. We'll do this together now. So you can have your stack of blankets. You can always start with a lower stack and then add on to it, but you'll have them within an arm's reach. Go ahead and do a test, and as you straighten your legs, make sure your feet aren't going to touch anything. And then you're going to keep your hips where they're at, bend your knees, lean back. You can come down to that elbow position. Remember, we practiced this earlier. And spread the elbows, laying down on the floor. Now from here, you're going to slide your feet in as close to your hips as is comfortable. Grab onto the side edges of your mat, or just tuck the shoulders underneath you. Start to turn your inner arms up, outer arms down. And as you press the back of your upper arm down, squeeze the shoulder blades in. From here, press into your feet, lift your hips up, and tuck your tailbone towards the calves, towards the knees. And go ahead and grab your blankets, place them underneath your hips. Now we really want it to be under the pelvis. So you should primarily focus to have your tailbone supported. We don't want you to feel the blankets in your low back. The blankets very specifically just support the pelvis here. And then you can turn your palms to face the ceiling. But as you press your upper arms down, try and lift your back ribs off the floor. So you should feel that there's a little bit of a back bend position here in the upper back. And as you take a nice deep exhale, think about tucking the tailbone and lengthening the lower spine. And you can straighten the legs one at a time if you feel comfortable doing so. And as you take a nice deep steady inhale and exhale, allow the front of the body to be open. As you gently lengthen your breath, try to breathe into the sides of the rib cage. There's a little bit of form being practiced, meaning that there's a little effort in the legs to keep the legs straight and the toes pointing up towards the ceiling. And as you press your heels into the floor, try and tuck your tailbone with the legs being straight. As you press the upper arms down, squeeze the shoulder blades into the spine, but also try and tuck your shoulders underneath you. So it's more of the tops of the shoulders that we're aiming to roll towards the floor as the back ribs lift up. As you soften your throat, with the chin coming down to the chest in this position, you get some nice length in the back of the neck. Gently lengthen your inhale and exhale, observing your body as a whole. And then you'll bend your knees with your feet flat on the floor, lift your hips up, remove the blanket stack from underneath you, and then rest the hips on the floor. Taking a few breaths here. And you can take your arm up to the right arm up, roll to your side. And as you come up, we're going to prepare to lay down with our legs up the wall. And then after that, we're just going to lay flat on the floor. So you can adjust the area around you to accommodate what we're going to practice. I'm going to move my mat slightly. So we're going to start with a blanket near our head so that we can grab it when we come to lay down. So it'll be within an arm's reach. I'll show you how to come up into legs up the wall and some important attributes, and then you'll come in with me and join me in this. So I'm going to start by kind of leaning back. So we practiced this earlier, right? This leaning back position. I'm doing this now near the wall. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn to my side. And as I now lay on my side here, kind of like you're hanging out watching TV with kids, right? So I lay on the side. I'm going to then draw my knees into the chest. I can press my hand down, and I'm going to roll onto my back. And then we'll straighten the legs. Now, we don't have to have the hips very close to the wall. We just really want enough space there so you can feel your abdomen relax. We can feel the low back relax. And sometimes when the legs are tight, if you're too close to the wall, it kind of counteracts a lot of that. Instead, the low back starts to jam into the floor and it doesn't feel very good. So have a little bit of space between your hips and the wall, and then we'll rest here. We're going to move into Shavasana after this. So you can either keep your legs up in this position or come down and we'll lie flat on the floor. Okay, so that's all your choice, and we can decide when we get to that point. Let's go ahead and start by sitting next to the wall. Have a blanket for your head within an arm's reach. And then you'll lean off to the side and you'll come down to the floor. You can even bring your shoulder down to the floor. Knees into the chest. You can even hug your knees if you want. And then we're rolling onto our back. Taking one leg up the wall at a time. You can decide how close or far you are from the wall. I want you to have at least a fist's distance between your pelvis and the wall for today. And then feel free to place a blanket underneath your head and your neck. You can have the feet hip width apart. And lift one leg away from the wall at a time and give a strong internal rotation. So trying to turn the inner thighs, inner edges of the femur bone towards the wall. And you can rest the feet at the wall. And if you feel comfortable doing so, you can even let the feet splay. Let the legs relax. As you gently lengthen your inhale and exhale, feel your body settling into the floor. Take this time to absorb what we talked about, and very specifically, take some time to absorb what you felt. With your exhale, notice if there's any tension being held in the face, such as the eyes, lips, or jaw. You can even let the tongue relax. You're welcome to stay in this position, or if you'd like, you can move into a shavasana, just laying flat on the floor. If you choose to lay down flat, you'll start to bend your knees. You can either push yourself away from the wall or roll to your side and reposition yourself in a way that's clear from any props or obstructions around you. Whichever position you choose, start to let go of everything, everywhere. As you gently lengthen your inhale and exhale, notice what expands and contracts with your breath. As you inhale, try to breathe into the sides of the rib cage. And with your exhale, let go of everything, everywhere. Slowly place your hands on your abdomen, on your belly. Take a moment to appreciate your body for all that it's done and all that it will do. Appreciate your mind for taking the time to harmonize with your body today. And feel gratitude for your heart, that organ in the center of your chest that's dedicated to life and love. You can take your time, moving slowly to come up. And start by bending your knees, taking your right arm up and overhead or under your head. And feel free to take a few breaths here on your side before pressing yourself up. Whenever you're ready, as you come up to sit, use the props around you to sit comfortably. As you bring the palms together in asana, start to integrate concepts in the practice that we worked on even while seated here. I appreciate you all for taking the time to deepen your knowledge about mobility and yoga. Thank you for taking the time to practice with me today. Namaste. Well, thank you for joining me. I really hope to create a foundational knowledge about mobility so that no matter what pose you encounter, you have an idea of the mechanics of the body. A lot of the poses are really just pressure tests for different movements and dynamic aspects of mobility, really just challenging our concepts about what joints are mobile. Sometimes you have one joint externally rotating and then the opposite shoulder doing the same, but the opposite ones are turning in a different way, especially once we get into twists and stuff. So sometimes all of these concepts can get quite dynamic. So I hope today's class kind of broke down on a more intimate level what those movements might generally look like when in a distilled form. It can also give us a lot of feedback if there's any tension or pain in a particular area of the body. With all of that said and everything that we practiced, the truth of the matter is that it's very difficult to access true yoga, which is defined as stilling the fluctuations of the consciousness. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha, that's the Sanskrit. And sometimes that's difficult to access when we're in pain or uncomfortable, right? When we have physical stiffness and physical limitations, that stillness is absolutely disrupted. So I hope that this can kind of be a doorway into a more fluid physical practice where we can maybe start to access some stillness in the mind over time. If you have any questions, I would love to chat more with you. If you have any specific areas of your body that you're wanting more insight or information on, then we can talk about that as well. But I hope that you can at least take a little bit of these poses and practices into your daily life. And whether it's one of them or all of them, practicing them to some degree, I really hope to hear about how they might benefit you or what your experience is like with that practice. So please keep in touch with me. Let me know what your process is like. Thank you again for being here and joining me today.